Hello, historians. Today's lesson is on the war that made America. I'm your host, Dr. Summer Cherland. When you hear those words, the war that made America, make a prediction. Which war do you think I'm talking about? Just guess. Do you think I'm talking about the Revolutionary War, the Mexican-American War, the French and Indian War? What just automatically comes to mind? Today, we'll be talking about one of these three wars. Let's take a look. Which one do you think it might be? All right, it's 16th century. It's the late 16th century, and three major colonial powers or empires have colonial holdings in America. Spain controls modern-day Mexico, California, the Southwest, and parts of Florida. France dominates eastern Canada, most of the Northwest, and the Ohio River Valley. Meanwhile, Great Britain has control mostly on the eastern seaboard and the Atlantic coast. George Washington. He is this 22-year-old guy. He's young, he's ambitious, and he is hoping to become an admiral or some other advanced position in the British military. He's very new to the Americas. One of the ways he works or tries to work his way up in the British military is to use Virginia, right? He uses the Virginia military and the Virginia government as a way to rise in the ranks of the British elite. And this is because Virginia is a British colony. Britain controls most of the East Coast. So meanwhile, Britain, Spain, and France are all jockeying for strong footholds in America. And they're fighting on multiple fronts. They're fighting in Europe, they're fighting in the Caribbean, and they're fighting where we look today, which is the Ohio River Valley. You can see this is where it is. Virginia's on the bottom right, Ohio's on the top left, Pennsylvania's on the top right. The Ohio River Valley is really the space where the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers meet. At this point in time, France controls it. Naturally, it also is dominated by native people, but France has the colonial holdings of this space. British conquerors, the crown, really wants to expand westward eventually, access more American resources, but they can never go west as long as France controls the Ohio River Valley. So look back on that initial map from the 16th century. So let's take a look. If this, let's do spotlight. If this is the Ohio River Valley, right, kind of right here where I'm circling with this red shiny thing, all of that blue is French holding. All of this peach or kind of pink is British holding. So if this is the place in question, what the British want to be able to do is eventually claim this territory and move west. They want to go further and further west to access things like lumber, furs, right? They want more space as well. But they're not going to be able to just do this, right? And George Washington, who's this guy living in Virginia at the time, he knows that the British can't afford to send a fleet of soldiers from the home country. So what he does is he offers to lead a team of Virginians, colonists, into the belly of the beast, into the Ohio River Valley, to negotiate with the Iroquois people who live there and the French who dominate the region. He sees this as an opportunity to really prove his worth. He thinks maybe he can obtain Iroquois alliance, in an effort to join forces to fight off the French. But it's not gonna be easy, right? Because as you remember, the British don't have very good relationships with the native people living in the area. The French are actually much more likely to secure favor among Iroquois and others. So along the way, there's a skirmish and a French diplomat is killed when the Virginians and the French begin kind of scrapping with each other. That is the flashpoint that starts the war, this moment where a French diplomat is killed. So as a result, Washington is called to meet with this guy, British Commander General Braddock. Braddock will become Washington's mentor, but at the time, they don't know each other very well. And let me tell you a little bit about Braddock and the British approach to warfare. Braddock is old school. He thinks that the war should be, any kind of war should be like lined up, right? You would line up in uniform, wait for the command to fire, and all military personnel would fire at once. And this is how two opposing groups would meet and initiate warfare. So this is Braddock's approach, and this is the British approach. But all the while, the French have been cultivating relationships with the Iroquois. They've also been learning different native strategies for warfare, like dressing up in camouflage, blending in with the environment, surprise attacks. These are not things that lend themselves well to the old European style of columns of warfare. In fact, Washington will later adopt this. He calls it the logic of warfare. But for now, he's aligned with Braddock. He wants to do it the way Braddock wants to do. So Braddock, his guys, Washington, all these people, they dress up in red, and they are accompanied by this huge battalion of other people who aren't just military, bands of cooks and washerwomen and the like, who march through these dense forests of Pennsylvania towards the French. So the French know they're coming. Meanwhile, the French are waiting in the bushes. They're hiding in the forests. They're ready to strike, and strike they do. They attack the British from all sides. The redcoats are caught off guard, and unsure of what to do, they begin kind of scrambling around, while the French and Iroquois simply take aim. Braddock is hit and dies a few days later. Washington vows to keep Braddock's memory alive, and in fact keeps the memento that Braddock gives him on his deathbed in his own guard until George Washington himself dies decades later. So this is kind of what happens to start the war. You've got your French diplomat who's killed, and as a result, the two countries declare war on each other. They've already declared war in Europe, but they begin confronting each other in the forests of Pennsylvania, Virginia, and later Ohio. The first battle is won by the French, but the French only enjoyed this victory for so long. Eventually, they have turmoil in their own country. This is kind of the era of the French Revolution. And so they began focusing on those conflicts, the conflicts with British and Europe, and this takes its toll within a few years. The two countries ultimately signed the Treaty of Paris, which removes the French from the Ohio River Valley altogether and vastly increases Britain's colonial holdings to the Mississippi River. Meanwhile, the Iroquois, who fought on behalf of the French, are not included or considered in the Treaty of Paris at all. So here's the problem, right? You have two empires fighting, France and Britain. Both empires are using people in the Americas as their war pawns. And the French, as the French are using the Iroquois, the Brits are using the colonists. And once the war is over, neither of these two groups of pawns stand to gain anything. The Iroquois are on the losing side altogether, right? They just lose all this territory anyway. And the colonists, remember, they were the outcasts of the British society. So they didn't really get any benefits from fighting, those Virginians that Washington took into the Ohio River Valley to start with. They didn't really get any benefits from this. Instead, the colonies themselves, the space, are wealthy, rich with natural resources to be extracted, like lumber and grains, native treasures, right? And the colonists who had fought on behalf of the Brits wanted access to those goods, right? We helped win you this territory. We should have claim to this. We should be able to claim this lumber, claim these furs, right? We should be able to move west and establish our own settlements if we like. But Britain said, nope, you are bound by the Appalachian Mountains. No colonists belonging to the British Crown are allowed to move west of the Appalachian Mountains. You are stuck on this side of our mountains. Here's what's even worse. The colonists were charged for paying for the war. The war is expensive. You have to pay back certain debts when you go to war with another country. And the way the British figured out that they could pay for the French and Indian War at the time was they would tax the Americans. All resources coming out of the Americas that the colonists don't have access to anyway, and all materials going in, get a way higher tax than they used to, because the British are trying to pay off the war. So think back to young George Washington, who helped win this war on behalf of the British. And then think about the American colonists who fought on behalf of the British, or the Iroquois people who fought on behalf of the French. Both of these groups are now stuck in limbo. They're not able to financially benefit from this war. They can't even move west on their own account. And none of their victories in America are considered valid by the British. None of the colonists who live in America are they're still not able to be called British citizens. And yet, Great Britain just won this entire territory. All of this space now belongs to Great Britain. So how do you think this affects the Americans? How do you think it affects the colonists, the native people? How do you think that this might feel to be a colonist at this time? And what do you think occurs next? So what we will come to find out is that this war, the French and Indian War, set the stage for all the battles, military or otherwise, that would come to define America. And therefore, that is why we call the French and Indian War the war that made America.